Welcome to Definitely Maybe Agile, the podcast where Peter Maddison and David Sharrock discuss the complexities of adopting new ways of working at scale. Hello, Dave. How are you today?
Excellent, excellent. I'm glad we get a chance to have this topic, this conversation. I think this has been brewing for a while. So our discussion today is product managers and project managers. That's what it's ending up being, right? Product managers, how they operate, what the expectations are on them in an organization, versus project managers and why there might be overlap, conflict, whatever may come out of that discussion.
And I think we're going to talk about product owners as well.
When I must admit, when I think product management, I think that product management function, which is product managers, product owners working together. There's a lot of swapped role titles there that can get confusing. So yes.
So we probably should start by defining what we mean by these various different roles.
Yes. So let me start on the product side, because that might be, I'm caused half the headache there. And actually there's something underlying this, which is the operating model they work in, right? So if we think of two fundamentally different operating models, one of them is a project-centric operating model. The packages of work are well-defined, substantial projects, and a project owner is likely to be responsible for delivering one or more of those well-defined packages of work that have traditionally a beginning and end, a budget, a timeline, a bucket of scope that has...
on time, on budget.
On time, on budget, yeah. And the product role is really related to product operating systems, where there's a continuous flow of work to improve a product. I always think of this one as there's a conveyor belt. So there is no beginning and end. There's a delivery of a range of different things that will make some experience for an end user, maybe employees if it's an HR system of some sort, or customers, whoever it may be, improves their experience. So they're happier, they're more likely to stay, they're going to spend more, and all of the things that makes it.
Yeah, well, with our project managers, we've typically got a very well-defined target. Like we know what it is we're trying to achieve. Now, whereas with a product manager in the product space, where it's generally more exploratory, would that be fair? Like we're looking to evolve the product towards a solution and adapt it as the user base changes, as the industry changes, as everything around it changes. So products work better in a more volatile environment because one of the lines which I was using that sort of sparked your interest in having this conversation was this one around product owners reducing decision latency and project managers reduce reporting latency.
Right.
And which might make it sound like it means these guys don't like project managers. It's not quite true. Their project managers have a very distinct role and a lot of very valuable skills. And not all project managers are made the same either. So they both play a role in creating value within an organization, but they tend to deal with different types of problems.
So my thinking around this has really sharpened up recently around abstraction of what we're measuring. When I think of project managers and projects and how they're structured, I feel like they're structured for a world where being slightly distant from the achievement of the results that you're looking for, the outcomes. I'm going to introduce new functionality that will allow let's say the retention rate of our customers greatly increase. They're going to stay with us for many, many more cycles, billing cycles. That in a project world, the assumption is we know that if we make these changes, we'll get the positive effect that we need. Therefore, I don't need to measure that positive effect. I can abstract my work away from that and still assume that it speaks as a proxy for this measurement that we're trying to achieve. And in a stable world where we really understand customer behavior very, very well, it's a fair assumption that I can distance myself. I can use a proxy activity. How many features have we delivered? How many, whatever it might be, the things that we're measuring as a project manager on time, on budget, with the scope as defined in the design specification document. All of that's an abstraction away from, are we actually achieving the result that we want to get to? Product managers can't work with that abstraction. They have to work with the actual data. So they have to see retention numbers changing. They have to see people returning and engaging and using their product. And typically that's not because that's what they want to do. It's because things change fast enough that if they're not close to it, they're going to lose an understanding of what's happening.
I think you're giving me a nice little segue to explain my view on the difference between a product manager and a product owner, because I see those two roles as slightly different. And the space that kind of brought this home to me was a few years back working in the CPG space, consumer packaged goods, where you have these roles called brand managers. And brand managers have oversight of decision making across the entire brand. It seems to me that we kind of took that product, the brand manager who owns a product, and we took it into the technology knowledge space, and we said, well, the one person being able to understand everything about all of these pieces is a little too much when you've also got to understand enough about the technology and what's possible to be able to make decisions on that side. So we took that role and we kind of split it in two. It's kind of what it feels like to me. It's probably not entirely true, but that's kind of how it operates, at least, because you've now got product managers who have that oversight of what's the direction, what's the strategy, where are we taking this product, what's it going to do, and you have product owners who are essentially there to reduce the decision latency of all of the technical teams who are building and creating and trying to figure out where to go, and they need somebody who can help them make decisions quickly so that we can adapt and evolve as the market and industry change.
It's a problem of scale. When you've got one single team, that product owner and the product manager are pretty much the same individual.
Yeah.
But as you get and there's it cascades now. But we're getting off on one side, 100% agree. I think we're on the same page there.
And then we've got the project managers, where my lovely little anecdotal story for this is working in a large bank, as I quite often have done, encountering a TPM, technical project manager, who I sat down with and I was basically asking him very much about, like, what is his role, what is he doing, because I was mapping out what the system was doing. And he explained to me that basically his role was largely twofold. One, he had to prepare all of the status and financial reporting, because that wasn't done by the product team, that went up to the EPMO, and which was used for the funding buckets. So the funding model of the organization required that this TPM role was there to do that, essentially, to fulfill that function because it was needed by the funding model. And the other piece that he did was he had 14 different groups that he coordinated across. And it was just all of the dependencies that, in order for anything to be done by this product, they had to go get all of these other 14 things lined up to, like, get access to servers or to networks or to storage or to all the different pieces that needed to happen. So the TPM's role was largely to broker all the dependencies and try and manage and juggle all of that, just so that the product owner could make a decision.
Yeah. Well, but often implicitly the decision's made by how those dependencies have been broken, right? So this is where what you're highlighting there is one of the key issues that really gets right under our skin and is frustrating, because often you either disempower the product owners and the product managers because they're actually handed a decision that's already implicitly been made.
Yeah.
Right? Or you're disempowering the project managers, who are basically now just running around just trying to say, but I need this by Thursday, and not in a situation where there's coordination and some form of discussion and trade-offs and so on. And so I certainly would say my anecdotal story, maybe whenever I talk about project managers, just as a consequence of this, or as a corollary, is I have definitely been involved in organizations where somebody somewhere said, we don't need project managers, and that translated into, therefore there were no more project managers in the organization. That has never ended well.
No.
So project management has a function. It definitely is. It's part of this as sort of a trade-off between product management and project management, and they need to be playing as peers. They need to play together really, really well. And the biggest headache I see is organizations where that is out of balance. And that's problematic. It's frustrating. Project managers, as you say, they're implicit in getting I always think of it as the big physical stuff, the things outside of your digital delivery of whatever it is that you're delivering. So recently, for example, we worked with a grocery store chain, loads of software being done on the point of sale devices and what gets done to manage inventory in stores and so on. But you still have a whole project management effort of training and rollout and upgrading and all of those things, which a product manager is never going to do. That's not part of that side of things.
Yes, it's all of the other things that have to be coordinated around this. It's the that often seem to get swept under the carpet. Which another way to look at it, the only place where that is possibly true is if you're operating in maybe in a pure SaaS world where you even where you're just I'm just pushing out changes into a service that is basically digitally consumed, so that.
But even there, if I think of like if I am one of these huge purely SaaS services, I'm still going to exhibitions and conferences. There are still, proof of concepts to build and partners to find that are going to do things. So there's a bunch of activity around it that is suited to that project management.
Yeah, and anybody who's ever organized any kind of event will know this.
Yeah, and it's a skill. It's a very valuable skill. Now, let's maybe touch on that product manager and project manager being peers in the organization. What are you seeing? What do you look for in those contexts? Where does that work or not work?
So where it typically doesn't work, I think, is the anti-patterns you're describing, where decision authority is being placed in the wrong place as a consequence of this. So the purpose of the product owner role being there to reduce that decision latency. So I've definitely, I can think of organizations right now where there's just not enough product owners with who have been given the autonomy and authority to be able to make decisions, which is leaving the technical teams out to dry because they're going, I need a decision now, and there's nobody who will give it to them, and you end up escalating everything up the stack, and it becomes an absolute mess all the time. So that there's that side of it for sure. So I do tie it back to that decision place. I think a lot of it, then the other side is that funding piece, where if the organization has kind of done we're going to go halfway down this product model, we're not actually going to change any of the way that we do our financial funding of initiatives or how we do work. We're not going to fund teams, or we're going to fund we're going to fund the initiative, and then of course, it doesn't quite fit.
As you're describing that, I'm thinking of a couple of scenarios where I've actually worked in where there's the project manager trying to track everything line item by line item in the budget, of course, because they need to present that back in. And the product team is just trying to get their work done, and it's interrupting the flow of planning and innovation and all of the things that go with that. I also just wanted to highlight that first part that you mentioned around the transparency in the decision making, and I think this is one of the things that what we often see if I think of organizations that are really strongly project centric organizations, I've rarely seen them where they're project centric and they follow some SDLC, software delivery lifecycle, to the letter, and it's really well. What we typically see is the input of those projects. There's some level at which that SDLC functions pretty well, and then it kind of cascades down into get the stuff done, the execution bit. And those project managers are amazing at getting the right people to the table at the right time to get their projects across the line. But the realization is that that's from their perspective as a project manager for the projects that they are herding to the end of a deadline. And the consequence of what that does if I'm working on my projects, what it does to your project is less of a concern because they've become very adept at working around it. The reason I mention that is in that discipline of project to product, the discipline of where the decision sits is often captured because project managers are really, really good at getting to the point where they can get decisions to keep things moving, which is subtly different.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Essentially, I'm thinking of some of the corollaries of that, such as completely making the project everything, because we've got to make sure that we hit the on time, on budget, which results in the individuals who are having to do that delivery being sort of worked to the bone to make that happen, and that results in very bad outcomes for them. Then but the project manager then gets celebrated and gets an award for having delivered on time, on budget, even though he potentially left a few dead bodies along the way. I could think of a few examples of that.
Yeah. I have done my apprenticeship, I like to think of, in project management, and I certainly have been in scenarios where I can imagine that dead bodies were somehow metaphorically
Yeah,
in
metaphorically.
the in the background. I
Metaphorically.
mean, it's part of the structure of the system, of course. But sort of touching on that, what I find there is what we often see is stronger project-centric organizations. The product side struggles to hold onto and maintain that decision making authority because they're often kind of tripped up by decisions that are being made sort of around them. So, one of the interesting things is having some mechanism where those decisions are shared across many different streams of work so that those decisions are sort of more visible and respected beyond a particular domain we might be working in.
Yeah, well, some of that comes down to let's start with an agreement about how decisions should be made.
Yes.
And so if we and actually have the conversation about decision making, because so it's not just something that's hidden in the background, and none of us are really aligned to this. So that we've actually got some decision making framework, some way of resolving disputes or moving forward from that. So I mean that's definitely a key part. When we think of these two different roles, and there's a role that AI plays in both of these too, of course, because I mean it helps both sides in doing the different tasks. I wonder if it helps resolve some of that friction you were describing, if it helps create bridges where those bridges might not have been before.
So currently I'm not seeing that. That's a really great question, Peter. I don't know where, but so I mean, sort of, you've really hit on something, and I think the reason it's not. I think there's two problems here. One is if I'm a project manager and you're a product manager, and we're both individually using the AI tools at our advantage to do our job better, because we're individually prompting and guiding, then it tends to take my side or your side, depending on who's doing the work. So it's not naturally bridge building at that point. It's actually reinforcing, you're absolutely right. You should be doing this. Your decision to make this, this, and this happen is the right thing. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but there is that. I'm not thinking of it as we're all working on something together. I'm thinking of it as two of us getting our advice from two different impartial perspectives.
Right.
And it's not creating the bridge in that world.
Now, might partly be me, but I have a habit of asking these tools, like, sort of, be critical. Tell me what's wrong
Yeah.
about my thinking.
Yeah.
Or a question in this case is like, take the role of a product owner if I'm being the project manager, and how
Yes.
would you respond to this? So you have the ability to use these tools to think through some of these decision prompts differently. So some of the other things that it can do is just simply the data extraction and presentation of the decisions, and doing that in a way that can make it easier to think about what are my options, what are the different ways I potentially could go solve this.
Yeah. First, I think you're quite an advanced user, I would argue, so that there's an element of we've got to remember to ask for critiquing from the people that we're going up to have to report alongside. For example, it's very difficult for us to necessarily have that. I'm also a bit concerned that it knows a little bit about it nowadays, at least, certainly the models I'm using begin thinking in the way I'm thinking. So I have to actively say, here's a totally different version of Dave for you to think about. Here's
Yes.
This is the impartial Dave, not the partial Dave, or whatever it might be. But I do agree that I think there's mechanisms around. I think a more interesting one is to look at the flow of work and look at where AI can help us there. Because again, when we take an individual view, this feels a lot like optimal optimization of different steps. And if we look at the entire flow, now we can see where are the real holdups in us moving forward. And we have a very interesting systems oriented conversation.
For next time.
For sure. For sure. Yeah.
So, what 3 points should we have for our audience today?
So, I think we didn't mention it, but we've got to the point where project managers and product managers and product owners, they overlap. They have a lot of kind of opportunity to bump into one another while they get their work done. And I think the one key learning from that is recognizing that it's not either or, which has somewhat been a perspective in the past. I think it needs to be recognized that we need both skill sets We're going to use both skill sets in different places in the organization. That would be one key. The second one, and I'll leave you with one or two of your own, but the second one I'm thinking of is a peer-to-peer relationship between the two. That one is the ideal. I mean, like a real, as soon as there's any sort of hierarchical gap, it tends to start breaking down, I feel. And I think when there's a true peer-to-peer relationship between those two, that can be a really difficult pairing to beat.
Yes, yeah. I think the third point I take from that, think about the decision-making authority, like who is able to make this decision. Have you got it documented who makes these decisions? If you have a product owner whose role is essentially to reduce that decision latency, to help guide teams, you need to ensure that they are actually empowered and able to make those decisions, and to ensure that they're supported in being able to do so. I think understanding that, understanding if you're on the other side, if your project managers are simply there to support a funding model which is different from the operating model that you're using, then you need to potentially think about finishing off the implementation of your operating model. That even then you will still need the project managers. It's just that if the project manager's sole reason for existing is because they have to fill in a spreadsheet once a month, then you really should think about finishing off your operating model. So I think those would be my big takeaway. Well, thank you as always, Dave. I really appreciate the conversation. I hope that was valuable for our listeners. And
thanks again. Always a pleasure. Until next time.
Until next time. You've been listening to Definitely Maybe Agile, the podcast where your hosts, Peter Maddison and David Sharrock, focus on the art and science of digital, agile, and DevOps at scale.